Okay. We are recording.
Great. It is Tuesday, the 12th of May. It's 7:02 p.m. And this is the May meeting of the Trail, Sidewalks, and Bikeways Committee. To conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and the emergency ordinance, this committee needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record. It's a bit cumbersome, so I ask you in advance for your patience. First, because each member of the committee is participating in this meeting from a separate location, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and in an appropriate volume for all of the other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask each committee member participating in this meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following the roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. I am the representative at large and chair, Ken Comer, calling from my home in Springfield. Braddock District, Mr. Cosgrave.
This is Bob Cosgrave, representing Braddock District, calling from my home in Hickory Farm subdivision in Braddock District.
Hunter Mill District, Mr. Rowe. No response. If he's on mute, he'll get back to us. Mount Vernon District, Mr. Klein.
Ken, Jim sent a message saying he had another public meeting tonight. He might be able to join us about 8:30, but he's not here at the start.
Okay, got it. Drainsville District, Mr. Smith. He sent us an email, said he was, what, are you here, Wade? Okay, he did say he was not going to make it. Providence District, Mr. Foster.
Foster calling from Providence District.
Mason District, Mr. Albright.
This is James Albright calling from the Mason District.
Thank you. Springfield District, Mr. Liebert.
This is Carl Liebert calling from Burke in the Springfield District.
Thanks. Lee District, Mr. Pipkin. No response. Sully District, Ms. Zampa. No response. Clifton Horse Society, Ms. McDaniel.
This is Katie McDaniel for Clifton Horse Society, calling from my home in Oak Hill, Hunter Mill District.
Thank you. Fairfax Alliance for Better Bicycling, Mr. Newman.
Everybody, this is Sean Newman calling from my home in Springfield.
And Fairfax Area Disability Services Board, Ms. Cohen.
Hi, this is Debbie Cohen calling from my home in Burke.
Thank you. Fairfax County Federation of Citizens Associations, Mr. Tipton. No response. FCPA, Ms. Iannetta.
This is Beth Iannetta, Park Authority, calling from my home in the city of Fairfax.
Thank you. Northern Virginia Builders Industry Association, Ms. Portilla.
Soledad Portilla, calling.
Thank you. Got that. Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority, Ms. Reese.
So Andrea, I'll just to inform the group, Andrea Reese has left or is going to soon leave Nova Parks. So that's a vacant spot at the moment until they're able to fill it.
She's left the Park Authority itself, right?
Yes, sorry, we were talking Nova Parks or right?
Nova Parks, yes, yeah.
Yes,
In other words, they we're very delighted they're participating. Well,
yes,
okay.
she has moved on to other employment.
Okay, got it. WABA, Mr. Albers.
Howard Albers calling from my home in Fairfax, Virginia.
Okay, I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of the committee. It's our practice to approve this and all subsequent motions by acclamation. So I will ask now if there are any objections or nay votes Hearing none, the motion carries. Second, we'll get to the staff and everything after we get through the diatribe here. Second, having established each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures, the fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for public access to this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this committee to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of this committee and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that this committee may conduct this meeting electronically through the Cisco WebEx video conferencing platform. This format will also provide a dedicated phone line. The public may access this meeting by going to the fairfax.webex.com and entering event number 173-270-9921 and password trails 2021, or by calling 844-621-3956 and using access code 173-290-9921. It is so moved. I will again ask if there are any objections or nay votes. Hearing none, the motion carries. Finally, it's necessary to establish that all of the matters addressed in today's agenda address the emergency itself, are necessary for the continuing continuity of Fairfax County government, and/or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and the discharge of this committee's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved. I will again ask if there are any objections or nay votes. Hearing none, the motion carries. Next point, I'd like to gather up all of the members of the staff who are with us.
I can go first as David Loss, Fairfax County Department of Transportation.
Thanks, David. Hear you. Anybody else from staff?
Nicole Winans, Fairfax County Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Nicole. We hear you fine. Anybody else?
This is Tom Bishotti. I'm the director of Fairfax County DOT.
Tom, thanks. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And anybody else? Next, let me ask, are there any members of the public who have joined our committee? Or have joined the meeting, that is?
Yes, so we have two, it seems. First, just introduce Jennifer Baldwin, who we've invited from Alta Planning, and she'll be giving a presentation in a moment. So Jennifer, if you can just unmute, make sure we can hear you.
Hey everyone, excited to be here.
Great, thanks. And just looking at the attendees list, it appears we do have another member of the public. Let me unmute him or her. Hey, if you can introduce yourself, that'd be great. You're unmuted there.
Yeah, hello. Hi, this is Canon Chehich. I'm a Mason District resident. Just interested in transportation and walkability, just listening in.
Okay, and did for the recorder, I'm sorry, could you give us your name again? Sorry.
Sure. It's Canon Chehich.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I appreciate it.
So just for the ease of working it, I'm just gonna make you a panelist. So then I don't have to be the one to mute and unmute you. And I think it'd be easiest for you to participate that way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that's done.
And anybody else whose name I didn't call? I guess David would have to unmute you, but because you're not a panelist.
Ken, Dayami Pipkin is signed in also.
Yes, Dayami Pipkin from Lee District is here.
Dayami, thanks. Good to hear from you. Okay. Anybody missed or couldn't get to the mute button in time, or anybody else?
Ken, maybe you were going to do this. This is Steven. I was just going to let our public member know that we would set aside time for him.
Yes, yes, that's actually next thing on my agenda. Rules are that we, for public, when members of the public attend, at 8:30, we stop what we're doing and the floor is yours. And we give you a reasonable amount of time to comment. You don't have to, but that's what the policies that we are living by here. Okay, with that complete, then we can move to our agenda, which I now have right in front of us. We all have right in front of us. So the first item on the agenda is Jennifer Baldwin. So Jennifer, the floor is yours.
David, can you move the ball over?
Yep.
While you're doing that, just a quick introduction. Jennifer is the consultant that works on the active Fairfax transportation plan. And we invited her here today because we would like to provide a project update, but also have an in-depth discussion on the vision and goals. And nobody knows it as well as Jennifer, all the analysis that went into the draft, and I don't think you'll have met her yet, so this is a great way to establish this relationship, because Jennifer will be with us on this project for many months and maybe a year or two to come. So please go ahead, Jennifer.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. And like I said before, I'm really excited to present to you and have some good conversation about the Active Fairfax project and where we are so far. So for agenda of this presentation, I'm going to give an update of the project as a whole. So I'll go over the schedule, share a little bit about what we're hearing from the community so far for the public engagement phase that we're in now, and then an update on the systematic safety action plan. And then, like Nicole said, I'm going to go over the draft vision statement and goals. Some of you have already provided great comments, so really looking forward to some good discussion on this item and give you an overview of the next steps for the process to get to a final draft vision and goals. And then we can have some good discussion. But feel free, if there's questions, we can keep this, pretty open for discussion as we go. So specifically on the schedule, like Nicole mentioned, we've been working on this project since fall of last year, have really been diving into existing conditions. So we've been learning a lot about the existing, trail, sidewalk, and bikeway network within the county, and then also doing a deeper dive on equity and demand, trying to understand where the need and the demand is for active transportation. From an engagement standpoint, it's been challenging with COVID, but we have put out quite a few resources online, which I'll go over in a second. And then also really trying to be creative and think outside the box of trying to provide folks other alternatives for those that may not be as connected virtually. So I'll share that in a little bit. We are right here, so we're getting really close to the completion of phase 1. And I think you guys know, because Nicole has presented in the past, but the heart of phase 1 is to develop the draft vision and goals. So really understand existing conditions, hear from the public to really lay the groundwork for what's going to come in phase 2, which is going to be the nitty-gritty of the network development, prioritization, how we're going to, prioritize improvements with limited funding, and then the strategic safety program plan is a big element of this phase as well. So public engagement. So we launched at the very beginning of April, and I hope you guys have been to the website and left us comments, but we have been doing quite a bit of engagement. Nicole's hosted 9 district-specific community conversations from across the county. So really giving a project overview, going over the purpose of the project and the different ways that folks could get involved, and then taking comments. And it's been really interesting to see the depth of the comments, the differences based on which district they're in throughout the county. And we've also been, like I mentioned, trying to think creatively about how we can reach folks that may not be connected virtually. And so we printed a shorter survey. So if you've taken the online survey, it takes about 18 minutes to complete. And a shorter survey just got at like the 10 most important questions. We printed them in multiple languages. and hard copy, and then have been distributing them at the food distribution sites. And we included a postmarked envelope. So it was really simple for folks to complete the survey and then drop that in the mail back to us. And they're floating in. We're getting quite a good response. And it's really allowed us to have a broader representation of feedback from across the county. And then specifically, like where we've been hearing comments, this is an image on our interactive maps. On our project website, we've got a map up that asks people to place ideas and locations for where the key destinations are for active transportation and the barriers that may exist to their day-to-day travels. And so we've gotten over 900 comments on that map alone, and a really large variety of comments. People are really sharing their day-to-day experiences and their feedback. And then we also have a separate interactive map that shows the existing plan network. So the previous trail recommendations, the previous recommendations from the bike plan, is shown on that map, and then people could draw in missing gaps. Or some folks are also drawing on top and just reiterating, I really need this gap to be implemented, or I don't like this gap. So it's, again, a really deep bench of a variety of comments, and we're really looking forward to being able to dive in and really understand what the community is sharing with us. And to date, we've got over 1,200 survey responses. That's primarily English. We are, like I mentioned, the different languages are floating in. They tend to be more of the hard copy responses. So we're getting, more distribution there. And I think in general, what you would be most interested in knowing, it comes as no surprise, access to trails, trail connectivity, access to recreation has been a very common theme, consistent across the surveys as soon as we opened. And so that's been the primary destination that folks want to be able to access. And, complete streets are definitely important to the users. And, they recognize that public health is a really big component of a complete street or the trail system. And again, that's not a surprise in a global pandemic that people are concerned, and they recognize the benefits that active transportation has on public health. And then in our survey, we asked for one word that summarizes their vision for active transportation in Fairfax County. And consistently, people are saying more sidewalks, connectivity is a really common theme, safety, equitable access, a lot of these common buzzwords that we're trying to incorporate into our vision and goals as well. And then, just a brief update and kind of like a sneak peek on the draft systematic safety program action plan. It's currently under internal review. We've been getting a lot of feedback from across different county staff, and the program is really set up on multiple different categories. So we're looking at design, education programs. So we're trying to really think comprehensively about safety and come at it at many different strategies. And so it's really coming together as an action plan of several different action items that have a timeline associated and identifies potential partners. So it's not just Fairfax County. It's really thinking outside the box and really identifying, a large audience and different partnerships that can help improve safety. And so we are going to be scheduling a meeting. We have a working group made up of a variety of staff and outside stakeholders, VDOT, that will be reviewing the draft and coming together in May. And then the plan is to do rounds of presentations in June. So we'll be back to you in June to present the safety program plan and get your thoughts and feedback. And then ultimately looking for board endorsement in September. So with that, if there's no questions about the project as a whole, I'll jump right into the vision and goals.
I have a couple of questions if I could hold.
Sure.
Hi, James Albert from Mason. Are we allowed, Nicole, is it okay if we ask questions? So the question I have is two questions. One is how you made a statement that you're getting some information in from other languages. What would you compare the ratio of English speakers to non-English speakers in terms of the amount of feedback you're getting?
It's still low. So I would say we're probably at about the 50 mark of 50 completed surveys in different languages, plus or minus. Like I mentioned, a lot of those are hard copies. And so we're taking the time to, need to get those translated to get them back into the system. So it's hard to give a complete measurement, at this moment. But it's definitely the majority is English survey responses. And we've been doing our best to try and be creative of how we can get out there and get them distributed. any additional ideas. I should have mentioned the survey is open until May 15th, so we just have a few days left. So if you have any other communication channels to push this out, this is the last week and weekend. We are going to be pulling responses on Monday to start really analyzing and understand what the public's telling us, because it's going to take a bit of time to pour through. When I mentioned like a deep list, that lots of folks are giving us a ton of feedback, and we really want to take the time to understand what they're telling us.
I guess my question sort of is like, so what, not what I can come up with, what besides going to food banks and stuff like that have you been trying to do to reach out? Separate from, you know, what's distinct about what you've been doing that's been successful?
So we've purchased Facebook ads. So we've done some social media posts and bought advertisement targeting specific demographics. We've also printed the survey in English and Spanish into a booklet format. So it includes the survey, a brief project overview, as well as hard copy maps for people to draw up. And those have been distributed to the recreation centers that it's out there. There's posters with QR codes at the park recreation centers. And so that's one element. And then with those community conversations, we've done a newsletter that's been, promoted, again, using social media.
Okay, and so then after you do all this, thank you. After you do all this, I can't get it. Maybe Nicole, you can help me with this. How, like, if all of us have contributed suggestions and ideas, who actually evaluates them and makes judgments about them? I don't quite understand how like that plays out. Like if we've made suggestions, do all of them get accepted? Do 1% get accepted? How are you making those selections?
In terms, I want to make sure I understand your question. In terms of suggestions to the vision and goals, or suggestions for engagement strategies to reach people?
You've engaged 900 comments about various elements, and I've been participating. Nicole knows. So my question is, how are you establishing a criteria and a process by which you are then going to evaluate all 900 of them, or is it going to be done internally? Like,
yeah, so that's the process that we're going to start next week. So it's really we're going to read every comment, tag them with key themes. A lot of the comments on the interactive maps are very specific to the network. Folks identifying barriers, challenges, or opportunities, and then that plan network map. Those are going to be held, grouped, and identified, and held for phase 2 incorporation as we start working on the draft network update. And then we're also going to be organizing comments and feedback into what I'm going to show soon, the vision and goals, so that we can see, is there anything that the public is telling us that is not captured within the vision and goals and objectives? And so that will be another input that we can tweak and update based on community feedback.
I'll just follow up and then I'll stop asking, but like, I don't get how, I don't hear, is it your judgment about which ones count, which ones are good? I mean, who's actually making a decision about which trail path, which connections to focus on?
Oh, and that's not this phase. So at this point, we're not going to be making changes in terms of the public. We received 100 comments on this trail, so this trail needs to be ranked #1. This is just organizing comments and understanding what the community is telling us. And then phase 2 is going to be that prioritization process of how we're going to really identify a prioritized network, and community engagement will be one component, but then it will also be feasibility of the connection, equity, demand, a lot of different indicators that we haven't even begun to think about the final list of how to prioritize.
Okay, thank you.
So this is Tom Bashad, and let me just weigh in on that as well. I mean, ultimately, the staff will make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors based on all the feedback that we hear, and the Board of Supervisors ultimately will act upon a recommendation. Either approve it, change it, deny it, but ultimately we'll prepare something at the staff level that will go to the board for their action.
Okay.
So, Jennifer, can I ask a question, please?
Of course.
So, I've attended a couple of the in-person or online meetings, and one thing that I noticed was that there were not a lot of people there. At one of the meetings, I think it was the Braddock district, it was like me and Bob, who's on this committee, and somebody else, I believe the TAC member, and maybe one member of the actual, what I would consider the public. So there's two questions that I have. I guess the first is, are you getting an accurate sampling of the public? Are there areas that are really missing? I would guess from that participation, I would guess the answer is yes. And then the second question that I had is, I guess, how are you incorporating comments that you received during those meetings into your analysis alongside the survey responses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are trying to incorporate what we're hearing from multiple different avenues. And so we've had our team kind of pour over the recordings of those community conversations and have summarized some of the key themes. So they'll be counted as a comment and an evaluation towards the vision. And I hear you on the participation. You know, I think it just varies on people's availability. There's a lot happening in the world today, and virtual engagement sometimes is limiting in attendance. And so there were some lessons learned, you know, in terms of, you know, we really need to make sure we get these promoted well in advance and just do our best to reach as many people as possible. Some of those district meetings did have a really good turnout and some didn't. And so really trying to pour through the comments and understand that distribution is going to be important. In the survey, we asked for a zip code of where you live and where you work, so we'll be able to evaluate responses and see if there's any holes. And then I should just mention, you know, like Nicole said, this is the start of a project that we're going to be working on for at least the next several months, if not the next year. And this isn't the only option for engagement. So this is just the start to introduce the project and really get an understanding of, you know, what people are struggling with, what the ideas are around walking and biking and active transportation. But we'll definitely be doing more engagement when we release a draft vision and goals. Will be another opportunity to give feedback. There'll be an opportunity to provide feedback on the safety program draft, as well as we'll be doing a lot more targeted engagement and fingers crossed, hopefully more in-person engagement later this year when we start diving into the draft network update.
And to add to that, I think it's important to note that we really have been promoting the survey and the maps as the best way to engage. And the sense of the meetings was to answer questions, have, you know, a more open conversation about the project and about active transportation issues that may not fit well into a survey format, but then also promote the survey and the maps in the meeting. So we would have loved more participation, but the way many of these district meetings went, it was actually great conversations to have with this smaller group. So it was more like a focus group, I guess, than a large group would have limited us to how many people would have been able to speak. So everyone had a chance at all the meetings to address a whole variety of topics, which was very helpful information for us to have as well.
Great, thank you both.
Any additional questions before we dive into the vision and goals? All right. Well, we have, and again, I should mention too, and I'm sure you know from the previous update, but we do also have an equity advisory committee as well as a youth advisory committee that have also, you know, helped us in the development of this draft vision statement and the goals and objectives that I'm going to share. So that's been another, you know, important input and almost a focus group, if you will, to have some targeted feedback. So the vision statement, you know, has been development. We poured through vision statements that the county already has, and you know, tried to you know, see what we're working with to start, and then listening to what we've heard so far, and really working up a vision statement that tries to encompass everything, but is also very simple and easy for the average person to you know, to consume. And so the draft right now is Fairfax County streets, sidewalks, and trails are welcoming places where people of diverse races, cultures, incomes, and ages feel comfortable walking, biking, or using other forms of active transportation to safely and conveniently access the widest range of destinations, or to exercise, relax, or spend time outdoors. And that vision statement, that umbrella statement, is going to be supported by 4 specific goals, which are access, safety, equity, and livability. And we'll just dive right in. Each goal is supported by some specific objectives, and then we'll also have performance measures tied to them to help the county, evaluate progress towards achieving the goals. So looking specifically at access, so that goal is to provide a well-connected multimodal transportation network that provides safe, comfortable, and convenient mobility options for all residents of Fairfax County. And we have 4 objectives. One is to plan and implement a comprehensive network of comfortable, safe, and well-maintained streets, sidewalks, and trails that link neighborhoods and activity centers and provide access to the widest range of destinations. The second is to meet bicycle and pedestrian needs in all capital improvement projects and throughout all phases of development. Third is to reduce travel distances by implementing best practices and land use planning. And then finally, to monitor new trends and technologies and update standards to encourage their use. And I'll also mention, just in terms of the bigger framework of these goals and objectives, we could have 20 objectives under each of these goals. We recognize that. And our intent is to try and, be really focused on 4 to 5 key objectives that we're going to work on over the next 5 years, whatever time frame in the short term, so that we can be targeted in our program approach. And so I just wanted to mention that as we go through. I think I'm just going to go through and read all the goals, and then we can have a discussion, and I can flip back to the slides if we have specific questions for each of the goals. So the next goal is safety, to proactively increase bicyclist and pedestrian safety and comfort. And the objectives are to adopt a systematic safety policy and implement the strategies outlined in the systematic safety program plan, to pursue policies and incentives that reduce vehicle miles traveled and vehicle travel speeds, adopt and apply context-sensitive multimodal street and trail design standards that meet best practices, monitor effectiveness, and update the recommendations as needed, and then to monitor crash factors and provide targeted multimodal education on transportation safety best practices. Our livability goal is to support public health, environmental quality, and economic prosperity by providing inviting and enjoyable active transportation facilities that encourage frequent usage. And the objectives are to provide supporting amenities such as street trees, pedestrian scale lighting, benches, and bike racks along active transportation facilities and include placemaking elements. Second is to maintain sidewalks, bikeways, trails, and supporting amenities regularly to enhance user experience, safety, and comfort. And then finally, to provide a variety of educational and promotional programs and events to boost the use of active transportation facilities. And then our equity goal is to provide an active transportation system that prioritizes the needs of children and caretakers, youth, the elderly, people with disabilities, people of color, and people with low income. And the objectives there is to adhere to the goals of the One Fairfax policy, to apply a racial and social equity lens to all public engagement efforts and the planning, design, and funding of active transportation projects, and then to prioritize implementation and maintenance of pedestrian and bicycle facilities and amenities based on equity and social need. And before we get to our discussion, we did just want to give you an update in terms of the process and the schedule for this draft vision and goals. So we are presenting these to the Board Transportation Committee on May 25th. And then there will be a public review of the draft in June, and then the final submission for board approval in July. And the next steps for the overall active Fairfax transportation plan, like Nicole mentioned, we're breaking up the next phase. We're submitting a draft scope for a 50,000 to 100,000 task. And that's just to take advantage of existing funds while the county works to identify funds for that larger phase. And so they're still working to continue to seek funding for completion of the full planning effort. And that's the extent of the presentation. I'm hoping there's questions and thoughts and comments on the vision and goals, and I can go back to those slides specific if anybody has thoughts to share.
So I'll share a thought. I know. So I'm still concerned about the equity issue. I know you probably worked pretty hard on this whole thing, but like the statement being that the goal is to adhere to the goals of the One Fairfax policy is kind of like punting, right? So like whatever that is, we'll do that. a social and racial and social equity lens, it's all very vague. And it makes me concerned that, good intentions aside, there's nothing in here that's really meaty about how to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the entire community. So I'm less, I think I appreciate the amount of work that's going into it. I'm just really concerned that equity concerns, like equitable distribution of funding across the community, is going to be something that's missed in this Active Fairfax plan, and it'll just be more business as usual down the road.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good comment. We can look to incorporate more specific in the draft.
Yeah, and thank you for that comment, James. And I think it's important to mention the One Fairfax policy, which also may change over time. So one strategy to have references is to make sure it's current and remains current. So we want to be specific, but also not too specific in order to be flexible, because the equity strategy is still, I think, in development on many levels. Even though the policy is already adopted, the county has multiple efforts underway when it comes to best practices in outreach, for example, how to, I think there's a task force that is developing a best practice for county staff on how to conduct outreach. Funding may be on the list at some point of providing some best practices there. So we try to have the important reference to One Fairfax, and then some more specific goals that show the importance, I think, of making equity, the same, focus point as safety and livability and some of the other issues. In the past, we have focused more on the transportation aspect. So there are a lot of new ways this project is looking at active transportation, and for the first time, I think, providing funding recommendations as part of a comprehensive plan update and part of this comprehensive effort outside the transportation priority plan effort. So your point is well taken. Any specific ideas are appreciated of how to wordsmith this to get it just right. So please feel free to also reach out outside this meeting if you have any ideas on how to change the wording or strengthen the wording to make sure that this has some teeth.
So I will just say that under objectives, when you talk about prioritizing these facilities, there needs to be some language about, like, who's determining equity and social need. That's a very vague statement.
Yeah.
There are going to be further pieces that address that. That's all. I'll stop, Ken.
I just want to second that towards James. These groups are not monolithic groups, and unless there's really some outreach to determine how needs are categorized across such broad groups of people, I think that is a vague term that has very little meaning to those groups if their voices have not been heard in terms of the planning up until this point. And just going back to last month's meeting, in terms of like the percentages of people of color who had engaged with the surveys and given their input on it, and then hearing the relationship with how those same groups still may, with the paper input, not have that added into the plan or considered for updates in the plan. It makes me more concerned when I see the needs as stated right there, when I know that those needs have not actually been defined yet.
Thank you for those insights. Jennifer, do you want to quickly speak to some of the analysis we did as part of the existing condition? I think that may help address some of those concerns, since it's not just the survey we're relying on for this analysis.
Yeah, our existing condition analysis, we were looking specifically at transportation need. And so we conducted analysis that really helped us to identify vulnerable transportation users. and it relies on census data. And so we know that's outdated. So it's just one component of an existing condition analysis and one component of a potential prioritization metric. But it compares, it looks at different indicators of need. And when we think about transportation and vulnerable users, it tends to be by race, by income, by English as a second language, by access to a motor vehicle, age of both our older population and our youngest populations. And so it takes all these different indicators that nationally and best practice tell us, can have a vulnerability in transportation access. And then we have a composite map. And so we can look at the county, at the composite map where we weight everything equally. And then we can also look at each individual component and indicator to see within the county, how that matches up in the areas that have that highest need. And then, so that's the need analysis. And then we've also conducted a demand analysis. And so that, I think about that as where people live, where people work, where they play. So all of the parks and recreation and trail amenities, where they take transit. And then it has a land use component. And then again, those are all the various indicators that come together in analysis for a composite map that highlights, regardless of existing conditions, these are the areas of the county that has a potential for the highest demand for active transportation. And then we also overlaid the need assessment, so where our most vulnerable users are across the county, on top of the demand analysis, so where we think the highest demand is. That's really targeting across the county where we think investments are needed, or where the existing supply may be needed. So again, that's a data-driven. So we are trying to come out with a data-driven approach as best we can. We're looking at safety, looking at existing crashes, and then the engagement element that, and I hear you, it's always a struggle. I think in even COVID times, it's made it even harder to do, equitable engagement and go out there. And this is just the start. This isn't by any means the end of the engagement for Active Fairfax. And so if there's additional thoughts and feedback and comments on what you've seen in other projects, or what you believe is the best way to get as much feedback, we're definitely open for feedback and would love your ideas, because we have many more months of engagement with the community to make sure we are really having a broad representation of who we're hearing from.
And this is Tom. I'd just like to weigh in on the surveys. We are going to incorporate all the responses from the paper surveys. I think the comment that was made earlier was some of the surveys are in a different language, and so we're translating those to English, but then once they're translated, they will all be included in the analysis. So I don't want to think that anybody to think that those responses are not going to be included. They will be.
And also wanted to add that in that additional task we're looking at to continue after phase 1, we would take another look at the analysis we have done so far to make sure it's really reflecting of the experience of that it passes pretty much the snuff test. That doesn't make sense. So one thing that popped up was maybe foreign language indicator, which is traditionally used as an equity indicator, may need to be taken, carefully in Fairfax County, because we have a very wealthy, expat community, me being part of one, but not wealthy, but expat from all over the world that may not necessarily reflect need the same way it may in other communities. So we will take another look, make sure that it makes sense in a Fairfax County context, and we can allocate some additional funding to that test.
I have a separate issue, but I want to be sure we've exhausted the equity issue. So, so I will pause and wait to see if there's others that want to talk about that, to still talk about equity.
Yeah, Beth has her hand up, so if you want to go next, Beth.
Oh.
Mine wasn't equity related, so I was waiting too, but mine's quickly. I think I mentioned it in the core team. Just look, when you look at the language in the different either goals and objectives, it starts out very broad, which is good. And then I think out of habit, we just slip back into just pet and bike focus. And so I don't know the best way to do it, but I think you'd have to keep it broad to, keep all the modes in sight versus just sliding just straight into ped and bike. So, like for example, on the objectives on this screen alone, the second bullet says, funding of active transportation projects, which I think active transportation projects covers a range of different facilities. But then the next one says prioritize implementation and maintenance of ped and bike facilities. I think it should be like, just facilities, instead of just going back to those two. I know it's a habit and it's easy to name those things that way, but I think as you look at all the different the four topics, just kind of look and see, are you keeping a broad name of all the different types of facilities that these goals and objectives are going to apply to?
Just to clarify, Beth, your comment, are you referring to all modes that are part of active transportation or all modes, periods? Would that include transit?
Well, there's ped, there's bike, there's non-motorized, there's equestrian, there's all kinds. They're not just ped and bikes. And so I think just when you look at all these four different ones, you kind of have to, they kind of just start slipping into just ped bike. Like it gets limited. And so I don't know if you're just talking about ped bike and not the others, or do you need to find a way to keep it broad, especially in these statements, and not just specify ped and bike? Like it kind of eliminates other modes with the language used in these statements here.
Great point. Thanks, Beth.
So my alternative issue is, as I look at the goals across the board, I'm trying to, so in America's greatest cycling cities, which we are not one of them, and we're not even close. They have extensive networks where that can be used in a completely different way than what we have. And when you compare what I have in mind, say, for example, is the Tucson Loop, where you can do 100 miles in an urban environment and you essentially don't cross a road. It's an astonishing bicycle facility. We don't have that, of course. And I would envision this vision and goals would move us somewhat in that direction. And where is the creation of a ped bike network to be found as a goal in these visions and goals?
That's a good question. I mean, I think something that's specific. I mean, you tell me. I don't know if that would be a goal in the way we structure it, but it could certainly be a objective in the access goal. So plan and implement a comprehensive network of comfortable, safe, and well-maintained streets, sidewalks, and trails. Kind of gets at the goal of introducing that comprehensive and connected network.
Yeah.
Like, are you looking for something that's more like the Capital Trails Network, like a higher level trail status? The loop trail is a good example. Is the wording that's used here excluding something like that or not incorporating it enough?
I'm just looking at a way that somebody who attempts to create metrics against the goals, which is what, as engineers, Nicole, you and I do, right? What metrics would I try to build? This really, equity was asking kind of the same question. Does the goal push me towards creating network metrics that will actually move me closer to the vision that I think we all share? We'd love to have a loop or something of that nature. I'd love to have the WNOD and the cross-country trail behave like the Tucson Loop, and essentially allow people to move north, south, or east, west of the county without having to cross the road. That's a network. Those would be the backbones of the bicycling or cycling interstates that would allow people to, in fact, sort of map a route to Tyson's, map a route to Springfield, or near Springfield. And so that they could do it every day on their way to work. And the metrics that are associated with that would be some sort of time and distance. You've got travel distances, but there's not sort of a commuting use case bouncing around in here that I think is it kind of makes me nervous. With in this word of access, almost anything could achieve better access, but creating a network that actually draws people to it, because it is connected. Its connectedness is measurably improved, is orders of magnitude improved. 20 years ago, a dream. But now you go to several American cities and you can in fact see it implemented. How do I write there's only going to be one active Fairfax plan. I don't have an opportunity. There's not going to be another plan for us to do this. So this will be the only place where we can in fact inspire a movement towards something like that. And I just find that it's again, as Deami said, for this goal, it tends to be buried in generalities. It tends to be lost for its use of very broad words where almost anything will satisfy it, and we will probably get what we've already had. I know I'm not articulating it very well because I'm looking at this fresh, but and oh, by the way, you build a good network that touches all neighborhoods, and that is also an equity issue. As again, anybody who's ridden the Tucson Loop realizes that that has huge value to people everywhere in the socioeconomic spectrum. So I would contend it really is part and parcel of the equity issue. But I don't know the words I off the top of my head that would change this, but an efficient and effective network as opposed to a comprehensive network is really kind of what I'm looking for. Comprehensive network tells me that in the end, there's a sidewalk everywhere. Whereas, which we may get to sometime in the 22nd century, but I'm more interested in a network that is user efficient, user effective. It is so effective, it is so compelling in its ease of use that it draws users to it, as opposed to something where somebody has to hunt for a route to work, and hunt for something like that. And I again, I have seen this in other cities, so I know that it's not a pipe dream. It can be done. Sorry. You wanted a discussion.
I love it. Thank you. What I wrote down, what I heard from you, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding this. You said something that was pretty powerful, that access can mean anything that we can put it down. It doesn't mean people will use it or that it's user effective. And so I'm wondering, does the goal need to change from access to maybe connected network? And that way you can see that as a clear goal, and the objectives, we can wordsmith and, refine like you mentioned, but I was just wondering in response, my thought is that maybe access isn't speaking to all of these objectives the way that anonnother word or the
we're getting close. Of course, you want one word. Connectedness, or connected, connectivity, something like that. The straightforward the verbs, short verbs are usually more powerful, yeah, it's really is it is efficiency in the connectivity as opposed to comprehensiveness. So your first objective talks about its comprehensiveness, and I'm more interested in its efficiency. I'm more interested in its moving to a completely new level of efficiency such that it draws users. That's the type of inspirational goal. That's the vision type goal that I'm trying to inspire in this. We all share the same goal, but it's same ideals. But these don't strike me as inspirational.
Great. Yeah, I really thank you for that comment. We appreciate that, and we'll definitely look over see how we can get that better. And Beth, I just saw that second bullet says bicycle and pedestrian again. So thank you again for bringing that to our attention. As much as we try to be consistent, you're right, it does pop in.
Can I bring something else up on this slide? So I agree with Ken on, that connectivity is possibly a better phrase for this. So I noticed in bullet 3 of the objectives, you have reduced travel distances by implementing best practices in land use planning. And I think that is an admirable goal, but I'm curious how that's going to be implemented through the active Fairfax plan. That seems like it goes far beyond that. And I guess I'm curious how this is going to be implemented, how that's going to be incorporated into the comprehensive plan based on this input from the active Fairfax plan.
Yeah, I can take a stab, and then Nicole, you can definitely chime in. So as part of the phase 2 of Active Fairfax, we are working really closely with planning staff to scrub, if you will, the comprehensive plan, the special area plans, to consolidate them together and identify any inconsistencies in facility recommendations, network recommendations, terminology. And so at the end of phase 2, we were going to recommend a series of text edits and updates. And so this vision and goals is truly more of the county's vision and goals for active transportation, not necessarily, I mean, it's the plan itself, but many departments, it's not just the Department of Transportation that has a role in improving active transportation. And so, we worked really closely with different planning staff. They were really on board with trying to get land use planning because everyone recognizes the connection. The challenge, as you mentioned, doing this is no small feat, but there's many different ways to think comprehensively. And so we felt it was important enough to give a nod, and we are planning on, working on comprehensive plan updates and text edits to help move that pendulum forward.
And on that same note, I would actually like to see if we're going to go there with this as an objective, right? I would like to see that more specific, right? So if we're going to include best practices in land use planning, what sorts of best practices are we talking about? What kind of, is this updates to zoning? Is this, better in, mixed use development? I mean, what does that mean? I think that it would be good to have in here to actually have a goal to shoot for.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Just want to add to the thought behind the land use planning. So just taking a step back, we can build the nicest world-class active transportation system in the world. If you can't really get anywhere near you, people will not use it. I mean, our distances and our land use outside of activity areas are really our biggest challenge. So we kept it broad to just refer to best practices because those are also still in development. I think it's so new. I mean, there are now jurisdictions that abolish single-family zoning, and that is not something we want to give as a specific goal because that would be dead in the water before this even goes anywhere. So I think having just this this reference to transportation and land use is so intrinsically connected, and especially when it comes to active transportation, to make it viable. And I've entered about 50 surveys in Spanish, and the handwritten ones that I kind of could read while I was typing it in. And a lot of folks said more destinations to walk to in 15 minutes, like that idea of the 15-minute city, and shrinks now to the 10-minute city. It used to be the 20-minute city. So it's such an evolving field right now nationally that I think we should be cautious to be too specific, because also it really depends where you are in Fairfax County what the best approach should be. So I think it's important to mention, and also want to clarify that this is really just, as Jennifer said, the high-level goals. There will be specific metrics and performance measures developed as part of this project as well. So this is not going to solve all the issues and all the wording, and we need to be a lot more specific. And some of these topics are so complex, like the safety issue that we refer to the safety plan, because the safety plan has 40 goals in it that can't quite fit in this high level thought. And if you look at, and again, this is not all going to be in the comprehensive plan. So the project has a comprehensive plan element, but it also has recommendations for internal, projects and programs and things the county would like to work towards, not just for the transportation department, but also for other departments. But I think it's a beginning of a recognition that, and we have known that for our activity centers, that we need to mix the uses for a long time. But outside the activity centers, we have such a huge, land that is very, very much car dependent because of land use, and that and we're moving with ZMOD in the right direction, but it's baby steps. But making that connection, I think, in the goals is important.
Let me suggest, listening to you, Nicole, that and your responses, that bullet is not about travel distances. That bullet is about travel times. Distances can be very short on a map, but with split crosswalks and sometimes no crosswalks, or taking away crosswalks, to touch a sore spot for me, the distances are not changed, but your constituents are speaking about the network effectiveness in terms of time, not in terms of distance. So
I think it's both. Sorry, I think
yes,
it's both.
I would be happy with I would be happy with another goal or another bullet that talked about time, because I think time is critical and often unaccounted for. And I'm a little bit nervous that it's implementing best practices in land use planning is the only way you're going to improve it. I would argue that I would set the goal, and then you have all kinds of methodologies you use to solve the goal, but the goal should be to reduce times.
So Ken, forgive me if I'm misreading this, but that bullet says to me that we are going to adjust zoning policies in the county, or work on zoning policies, and what types of buildings or businesses or homes or whatever are authorized in a specific place, in order to make it so that people don't have to go as far from their home to the destination they want to go to.
Yeah,
right.
got it. So really, what I'm talking about is a separate issue. So yes,
exactly. So
yes,
I think what you're saying makes total sense, that we should also, that when you're implementing that network, right, that it links them efficiently with neighborhoods and activity centers, rather than just linking them, because I have an 8-minute crosswalk near me.
Yeah. We get a lot of them,
as you all have heard about before.
And that's a great point. I think we try to hint towards the effectiveness and efficiency of active transportation as a mobility option, in using the word convenient in the goal. But you're right, it's not quite spelled out in the objective. So maybe we can add a separate one for that one.
And I think that the third bullet, again, I read it as improving, um, improving zoning and, residents, etc. But I feel like I may be a more informed customer than the average person reading this who may not understand that that's what that's talking to, which is why I'm not asking you to put, abolish single family zoning in here. However, putting something along the lines of increasing mixed use development, or, you know, making more destination, adjusting, I don't know the exact wording, but I feel like my point is just, it needs to be a little bit more clear that that's what that objective actually means.
Noted. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Sean and I have again dominated the conversation. Any other issues for folks here?
Could you move to the slide that talks about the safety? Thank you. I noticed there's an absence of having a specific goal of towards 0 deaths. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about why that's not included.
Sure. So we're using the term systematic safety, which is the underlying philosophy. So systematic safety or safe systems is other terms for towards 0 death or vision 0. So it's all the same concept of creating a systematically safe road system and trail system or mobility system that would eliminate fatalities of all road users. So that's what that term means. I guess the actual reduction in fatalities would be a metric or performance measure. Is that right, Jennifer?
Yeah. So that would be how we would measure. So a potential performance measure of the safety goal would be a reduction in fatalities and severe injuries by a certain percent, given a certain time frame. And that would be how you would evaluate progress and evaluate that systematic safety program.
But that couldn't be elevated to a goal?
We can talk about that to see if that can be framed as a goal to, instead of saying increase safety, eliminate all traffic fatalities.
Or
I think it
minimize.
means the same, but it's slightly less specific.
I agree. I think minimize fatalities and injuries, or eliminate may be too far. It may be unachievable, so at least minimize, but explicitly stated in there.
And under the objectives, you said the systematic safety program. That might not be understood by everyone in the county. It's probably the new term, almost like active Fairfax transportation plan. It's kind of a new concept. And I think it would be a little bit better if it would be in simpler terms. It's just my view.
Thank you. And I did stumble over, I think, safe systems or safe streets on the global level as the term that's being used. Systematic safety is more of a US term. So we can play around to see what term resonates. We know there's a lot of problems with vision 0 for sure. So people think it has something to do with your eyesight. So we're trying to go with a term that is specific to what we're trying to achieve without confusing. And maybe systematic safety is not the right one, but
if you could take a look at that would be good.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Can I ask another question, or a couple other questions on this one? So we're conflating safety and comfort here, which I'm concerned I think should be two separate goals, right? enticing people. Comfort belongs to me on the, the connectivity, the how you're building it, right? Ensuring that it is desirable. Not necessarily like that this safety goal to me should really be focused on safety. And for that same reason, in the second bullet where it says reduce vehicle miles traveled, right? That is a good goal, and I think it should be a goal of the entire Active Fairfax plan, but I don't think that is a safety goal.
So that is actually mentioned as a safety goal. So that's one of the #1 rules of systematic safety, is to reduce the exposure, I guess, to reduce vehicles on the street, which also means that there are more people that use other modes at the same time. So the safety in numbers. So that was actually news to me too, but reading about best practices internationally, it's one of the key elements to creating a safe system. But it needs to be, it's not the only goal, as we have seen in the effects of the pandemic, that when there is fewer cars on the same roads, it actually creates safety issues because of speeding, because congestion is traffic calming. So it has benefits. So it's definitely a safety goal and should be under safety. And it goes with the vehicle miles traveled. So fewer cars and cars that are there going fewer miles in order to decrease the exposure to safety issues, coupled with some other improvements. Sorry, what was the second question?
The other part was about comfort.
Oh yes. So comfort, I think, has been confusing to other committees as well that we presented to. I think it refers to the perceived safety for the most part, that people will not use active transportation or any mode if they don't feel safe using it. If you're afraid of flying, you're not going to fly. You have to feel comfortable doing that. Maybe comfortable is not the right word. Maybe we should be specific here and say perceived safety. I'm not sure if that's too technical.
I think that goes back to what I talked about at one of the Active Fairfax meetings about women not feeling as comfortable walking alone or running alone on trails because of a perceived lack of safety, and that those are comfortable trails, but they are not perceived as safe.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
As Alta, as a firm, we talk about this, like, we always are constantly thinking about best practices for what words to use, and it's never easy, and each community ultimately kind of decides their own path. But comfort, when we think about the difference in comfort and safety, something can be technically safe, so we can evaluate it. It can be a safe facility, but if it's comfortable, it's always comfortable and safe, because you can't be comfortable if you don't feel safe. And so when you use them together, you can look at safety in crash reduction and other different measures. But if you're also evaluating comfort, and there are analysis to help evaluate the comfort of the facility, the amount of stress that it brings to users, then that is another component of evaluating safety. And so the terms are starting to be used a lot more together as an industry. There's also been a new push recently, a great conversation that we had internally about fun, because fun is also, if I'm having fun on a facility, that also means that I perceive that I'm comfortable, I feel safe, because you can't really have fun and also be, feel unsafe. And so there's been more push in trying to evaluate how fun in transportation and just bring more of that, intrinsic feelings and user behavior psychology, almost, if you will, to our planning and effort. But I think the idea, it's what also can relate to the average person that doesn't know anything about this industry. And so that would be my concern. If you take, I think comfort, people can relate and have their own story to tell and image of what that brings, versus pedestrian safety and perceived safety. It still feels kind of technical to me. But that's just my opinion. And so it's definitely something that we'll definitely, take a look at again and make sure that we're hitting the right marks, because I'm really, happy and appreciate that you brought that up for sure.
So I just want to clarify. I think that all of those goals are absolutely should be goals of this entire project. And if there's a way to weave comfort and safety and reducing vehicle miles traveled together, we should absolutely be doing that. I just want to make sure that it's clear what our goal is here, and that we can really focus then on then creating measurable or measures to actually meet those goals. But thank you for all your feedback. That's good to hear.
It's also stay tuned, because next month we'll be diving a lot more into safety, and you'll see a lot more details on action items and how to evaluate and move that forward, which is why I do think it's, it's important, whether we call it Safe Streets, Vision Zero, or Systematic Safety Program, to reference that plan. So that's a new program, it's a new initiative of the county that Active Fairfax is introducing, and it's a living, breathing document. There could be 1,000 action items that the county can take to improve safety. Our job's never done. That's how we approach, safety, and so it's going to be updated, and that's why we want to start to introduce that concept, just like One Fairfax policy, is a very focused reference within these objectives. So we're hoping to kind of create that same connection to the separate program.
And I want to mention, just to mention on the safety, and you didn't bring it up, which makes me think you're all well educated on the national best practices right now, that enforcement is actually no longer something that is really being pushed by the active transportation, or at least not because of the Black Lives Matter movement and arrested mobility and all these kind of issues underlying the enforcement or in-person enforcement. So the systematic safety plan will have some recommendations on more automatic enforcement, like red light cameras and these kind of things. But I just want to mention it, that's why it's not here. And since nobody asked about it, I guess maybe we have a shared understanding on that.
Can I ask a quick question? And I apologize, I might have missed this. The use of the word proactively. What is your intent with that? As opposed to just increase?
So proactively means to, and that's the systematic safety. It's just a different word to portray the same idea. Is instead of reacting to safety issues, analyzing crashes and then fixing those crash locations, to look at it at a higher level. Why are these crashes happening in the first place? And that's why, speed management, for example, is one of those key issues, and the reduction of vehicle miles traveled and the safety through design, those big ideas of how can we create a safe system that is safe at all times, proactively, without just being reactive to fatalities and injuries.
So I appreciate that, just in terms of, like, all your objectives are very clearly stated. This is the only one that has a little bit of, like, that's a word that's, has variety of meanings, and I understand what you're trying to get at. If you say increase bicycle and pedestrian safety and comfort, that doesn't detract from that at all. The whole goal is supposed to be actively pursued. So I won't wordsmith, but that's the one thing that popped out.
Right. So yes. So I think the fine difference is to not just wait for bicyclists and pedestrians and all other modes to feel uncomfortable or safe in a situation. So in that case, it would already be feeling unsafe or be unsafe, but to create that safe system that always feels comfortable. And I know that that's particularly in a context of Fairfax County and not having controls over our road is a pretty lofty goal, but it's just a different way of addressing safety issues on our road network, particularly, but also the trail network. But again, wordsmithing, I think, is always a challenge. So thank you for mentioning that. That's a word that stood out as being of concern.
So we're going to have to be moving on, but I want to be sure I capture. Anybody have any other urgent issues they want to discuss on this topic?
Ken, this is Steven. I wouldn't say it's an urgent issue. While I agree with many of the comments of my colleagues, and I thought these discussions on equity and access and connectivity, many of the points are on point. I thought my general takeaway was this is a really great presentation. I've been very impressed with the online tools that you've provided for providing input, and just overall I want to express my appreciation for the project thus far. It seems really high caliber.
Thank you.
I think certainly a lot of us agree with that. So thanks, Stephen, for saying that. Okay, so thank you for the presentation. Next on the agenda is David is going to give us an update on Bike to Work Day, the 20th anniversary of Bike to Work Day. Ooh.
Hey, thanks, Ken. So as Ken mentioned, Bike to Work Day is next Friday. And, you know, obviously it's back from last year when it was canceled, unfortunately. And so this year, the general stance, the kind of the way it's being promoted and that the participants are taking part in it is that this is less about biking to work because so many people are still working from home, and more about biking for exercise, biking to maybe take a break from working at home all the time, and just to get out and have like that sort of mental break. And so that's sort of the idea behind it. And there are still T-shirts this year, at least for the first 15,000 people sign up. I don't know overall numbers if there's still T-shirts to be had, but if you haven't signed up yet and want a T-shirt, you might still have a chance. But similarly in the sort of toned down nature of it, Fairfax County DOT, we've scaled back the number of sites of pit stops that we'll be hosting, as have you know, most jurisdictions in the DC metropolitan area. So you know, this year the only ones that we're doing are at the Government Center and at the Chantilly Regional Library. And I'm gonna have to take the presenter thing back from Jennifer. And then now I can share my screen. I gotta go to share screen. There's so many steps. Where's the button? Oh, it's at the bottom. Zoom's at the top. It's at the bottom for this one. So just pulling up the map of the station. Sorry, it doesn't show up great. I can't make the banner smaller on the website. So you know, while there are fewer than usual, there's still a fair number scattered about the county. So there's Government Center, and then those are the two by us. I know the Park Authority has a few that they're running, and some private entities have some as well. So do take a look to see if there's a pit stop near to you that you might want to check out if you haven't already. Some of the other rules that are part of the event are your standard COVID safe policies. So there's a page on these as well. But you know, unfortunately this year we can't do a lot of the cool fun stuff. So you know, no music, no food to give out. It's pretty much say, come get your T-shirt, check in. You have to check in at your allotted time that you've signed up for. I think technically we're supposed to put like little circles on the ground to keep people 6 feet apart. So I guess we'll get some tape or something to mark some sites off. So it's it's a bit sort of regimented and maybe not as exciting as fun as we would like the first Bike to Work Day back after last year's miss. But next year's will be more fun, I'm sure. So yeah, that's sort of the update. Again, you need to, if you haven't registered already and think you might want to, you need to do it on the Bike to Work Metro DC website. As you can see up there, you got to register at a specific time slot. So hopefully no one's taken like a good time slot from you and leave you stuck with like 6 in the morning or something. Although maybe that's a good time slot to you. I'm not here to judge. Other things to note: masks must be worn at all times if you're attending. So those sort of standard COVID things we've all come to know and tolerate will be a part of it this year, but hopefully it won't be a part of it next year. So if there's any questions on Bike to Work Day, do let me know. Feel free to jump in now, or if you want to shoot me an email later, that's also great. And the weather's going to be great. I made sure of that, so don't worry.
Which is not always the case on Bike to Work Day. So I'm very happy about that.
But this is my first bike to work day, so it's gonna be good weather.
There you go. You're hired. So normally bike to work day can be a loop where
Yeah.
you go back home and telework.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's great for a little exercise, a mental break to reset or get yourself going. So that's what we're going for. Beth, we're looking to chime in there.
No, I was gonna say, I wonder if they were gonna do a thing like show us your shirts over the years, and whoever has like the most T-shirts from the 20 years, in their collection could win something.
There's got to be people out there who have all the shirts.
I have a good 12 of them.
Any other comments, questions on bike to working? Okay, so that brings us to close enough to 8:30. So I will open it up to our at the moment. I think you're the one member of the public who is with us, unless somebody monitoring the list.
Yes. Yeah. If I can just jump in, checking the attendee list again. We have another member of the public who's joined, Ms. White. So I'm gonna make her a panelist as well. So now, sorry I didn't notice you sooner. Too much on my screen. But yeah, so for our two members of the public, now is a great time if you have anything you wish to bring up, and you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hello. This is Ken and Chihich. How does this work? Can we ask questions, or can we just provide a general comment, or?
Yeah, you've got Fairfax County Department of Transportation staff here who could answer questions. The rest of us are always willing to answer questions, but we're not officials. But the floor is yours. You can do anything you want. You can object to things. You can tell us why you decided to dial up. It's pretty much anything you want to say.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Yeah, I've been to the Mason District Active Fairfax meeting, and I would like to just kind of reiterate James Albright's and Yami Pipkin's point to the equity, especially. I'll talk mainly about my district just because I'm familiar with it, but I think this could be applied to any of districts, and especially the Mason and Lee districts, which are majority minority districts, the only two districts in Fairfax County that are 50% or more minority. I have a question in regards to if density will be considered in regards to prioritizing, and I know prioritizing is in phase 2, but considering these responses, I would like to just bring up an example in the survey. One suggestion has 33 likes. I was really, wow, that must be a really huge issue, which it might be, and I'm sure it is. And that's a street of 50 houses, and it has 33 likes, while we have certain corridors that have an excess of 40,000 people, only a couple comments. So that and those corridors are often mainly minorities. So how will density be considered in terms of the Active Fairfax project? Again, I would like to give a couple examples. Again, Mason District, but I'm pretty sure that can be applied to Richmond Highway too. For example, the 3-mile stretch from Alexandria City border to Seven Corners is 3.2 miles long. There's, let me look at my sheet so I don't say the wrong thing. If you pull the tract, I lost my sheet that I was looking at, but basically there's around 44,000 people in that 3-mile stretch, and the tracts that are bordering that 3.23 miles stretch that are adjacent to Leesburg Pike. So that's about 37% of the Mason District. And that comes out to a density of 14 people per acre. Similarly on Little Turn River Parkway going through Annandale, it's not as dense, but it's 4-mile stretch and there's about 40,000 people. So those represent huge populations of the district, and they're really not walkable at all. I don't want to say they're walkable because they're not at all. So how will density be considered where you're having responses with so many, likes, and you're getting all this feedback that, this is a huge problem on a street of 50 houses when you have a street that's a couple of miles with 40,000 people and you have very little feedback? That's a question too. I guess, I'm sorry, I forgot the name, but the person that's doing the consulting for project, I guess, if it's a question.
Yeah, thank you. I can take that from the staff side. I think Jennifer actually dropped off the meeting. So density is definitely considered a key part in determining demand for active transportation. The more people live somewhere, the more demand there is. As you said, some neighborhoods have only a few houses just by sheer volume of expected pedestrians. The more urban areas, and that includes more denser areas, will have higher usage of active transportation facilities just by the sheer numbers. So I wanted to share a map to show you what that looks like. David, if you could make me a presenter, I can share the map we created really quick. Do you see this screen? The maps.
Yeah, just go to slideshow mode.
Fine. Okay, there you go.
There you go.
All right. So those are draft maps and not something we have officially presented to the public as part of public outreach. So particularly the need analysis map on the left here needs a little bit more work. But what I want to show you is the map at the middle, the demand analysis that shows the denser areas of the county in darker colors. So just the density of origins, which would be the density of residential housing units or commercial density, shows up in this map as the areas where most demand for active transportation would be to be expected. And then overlaying those two maps of the equity need and the density and land use map, basically together, it shows us in this burgundy and brown colors where we have the highest density and the highest need for active transportation facilities. So some of these areas, like the Route 1 corridor, show up in those colors. And this is the type of analysis we will look at to make recommendations of where to focus funding in particular, and not how many likes a project get, because we understand that the neighbors use Nextdoor or their networks to hype up a project, but it's not necessarily the equitable way of deciding what project should be implemented. But it's not really part of this plan anyway. That is more something we'll look at as part of the next transportation priorities plan, where the funding really comes into play. So we can make some recommendations based on these areas. Could use some funding, or should we prioritize in the next round funding becomes available. But there will be a whole separate public process done at the time when funding becomes available at the larger scale, which should be 2026 or later at this point.
Hey, Nicole, this is Sean. I'm sorry. I think you explained it, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. In this slide that you're showing us right now, need analysis is based on income and demand is based on population, roughly?
So there are a lot of different indicators that it's actually the equity need analysis. So it has everything from car ownership we talked about the language barriers, income, homeownership. So all these different type of factors that usually are used for an equity analysis. So the county has done, like, the neighbor community service and health department, for example, have done analysis like that just to focus their resources and identify the opportunity neighborhoods. So we did something similar using very similar indicators with a slightly stronger focus on transportation needs. And that created this map, while the demand analysis focused on the density of origins and destinations or attractions, so parks and trails, was an indicator as well, and they're weighted differently, but it created those areas where we would expect most activity among active transportation users.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a follow-up, I guess, question or comment regarding the demand. So you're saying destinations. I don't really understand how the demand will be gauged. If are you using like cell phone data to see how many people are walking? Because it seems like it's a kind of like a chicken and egg problem. If the area is not walkable, I feel like a lot of the metrics will be seen. Well, there's not a lot of demand for walking. Why should we put any resources or any funding into the area if it's, there's no demand? But I think it would be hard to find any person that wants less walkable areas to any place. So I guess my question is how exactly demand is determined, or is it basically just if you can get to parks? Because those high density areas, they don't have a lot of parks. So that already kind of puts them in holes, similar to Annandale area and certain other high density areas.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So demand is a technical term. Unfortunately, it's sometimes confusing when we use technical terms in a different context. So what demand includes is not necessarily people calling us asking for active transportation facilities. So that type of demand, not in the economic sense. It's more of a outcome that's based on, it's more like a transportation model type of demand. So you have the place where people live, and then the place where people want to go, and that creates the need to travel. And that is basically the demand we're estimating based on how many people want to get from A to B in these locations. So if you have a lot of destinations like a commercial center or metro station, that creates travel demand. And then the origins, if you have single family homes, they don't create as demand for travel as a higher density area, just like you described. So even if there's no network there at all, the demand would still be the same based on the land use and the distribution of the different, origins and destinations. And we are using, so we have done some analysis using cell phone data to actually see current movements of pedestrians and cyclists. It's not data that's 100% accurate, but it's one of the best data we have had access to in a long time. So it's not self-reported data like we use in the census. It's data that we get from a company that uses apps, monitors apps that ping every 5 seconds, and based on the movement of that cell phone spatially, they can make a guess at what type of mode that person is using, if the person is walking, biking, or using a vehicle. There's some limitations on determining if the person's in a car or in a transit vehicle, unless it's a train, and it's pretty clear. But for walking and biking, it's fairly useful. But where we have limitations, for example, is walking within a shopping mall. Someone can walk for a mile in a circle in the shopping mall, and that would show up in the data. So it's or not everyone has a cell phone, so there's some equity issues with that as well. But we're looking at all these different type of data points. But we do think that the demand map and the equity map are probably the most data-driven information we have to determine where we get the biggest bang for our buck, basically, where those facilities are most needed.
Thank you.
And any other public comments? Okay, so that moves us to new business. First item on new business that did not make it onto our schedule, but I definitely want to get to is Bob Cosgriff attended all the board's meetings from the county, I guess. Well, I'll let Bob talk about the meeting he went to in April. Bob, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Yes, I got word about a meeting that covered systematic racism, and it was training that was provided to the county, to various staff elements of the county and so forth. And I thought it would be, helpful for the committee to have me attend this, sort of against the backdrop of our earlier effort to have the Board of Supervisors approve a new seat on the board of an equity seat. And with the idea being that that person wouldn't be the only person on the committee to deal with equity issues, but would be perhaps a subject matter expert and also a link pin to other county bodies, such as the chief equity officer, to, convey information in both directions. But the letter that came back from the chairman indicated that we all need to be and should be equity champions. And I firmly believe that on this committee, that's in fact the case. But it never hurts, even if you're a champion, to work out and get better at what you do. So I attended this online training session sponsored by the Fairfax County Department of Human Services and conducted by 2 instructors from the Racial Equity Institute in Greensboro, North Carolina. The presentation was kicked off by Carla Bruce, who is the Fairfax County Chief Equity Officer. And she provided some good remarks at the beginning to sort of set the stage. So the Racial Equity Institute deals with deep analysis of racial equity issues using a multidisciplinary approach. And they set out their expectations as follows: 1, to get closer to the problem; 2, to change the narrative; 3, to be willing to be uncomfortable; and 4, to maintain hope. And I'm going to go through their presentation sort of in summary form, and then I'm going to try to finish up with what I see as the challenge to our committee. So the first hour covered a concept that they called groundwater. In fact, that was the name of the training, groundwater. Okay, well, what does that mean? I asked myself that question, and the REI folks answered it. And they used a good example to explain what they were talking about in terms of systemic racism. They showed a picture of a dead fish in a lake. And so the question you ask when you see a dead fish in the lake is, what's wrong with that fish? Then they showed a picture of hundreds of dead fish in the lake. And so the question changes from not from what's wrong with that fish, but what's wrong with the lake? And so the answer is, of course, the water that flows into that lake through the groundwater around it. The water is a system, in a sense, in what they're trying to present. The fish are in the system, and the dead fish you can't do much about. But what about the new fish that come into the lake? That's the problem. That's their concept. And they then went on to the fact that in the terms of racial equity, the systems being analyzed are the following. There's 6 of them: the criminal justice system, business economics, educational achievement, and in sense of educational achievement gaps, wealth inequities, healthcare inequities, and housing inequities. So viewing these things as systems. And then they stepped into the research, and they derived 3 basic principles, abstracted out of all the research that they're going to use. And the first principle is racial inequality looks the same across all these systems. Social economic differences themselves do not explain racial inequality. And the third principle was the systems contribute significantly to the disparities noted. So that going through that kind of discussion took up about the first hour. The second hour consisted of looking in depth at the research that addresses those systems that we just went through, those 6 systems. This involved numerous statistics and charts. Ken, you would have been right at home here. The bottom line was that when all the various factors were analyzed using various statistical methods, regression analysis and covariant relationships and all that kind of stuff, to control for specific factors, such as socioeconomic status, for example, race was found to be the one factor that predicted outcomes, basically negative outcomes, most closely. For example, they used, I'll just cite a couple. School punishments like suspension and expulsion, health and access to insurance, medical tests and treatment, home ownership percentages, just to name 3. At that point, after, they went through each research thing with all the charts and data and made a couple of points to sort of summarize things. The first point was class and race are what are known as confounding variables. That is, race affects socioeconomic status and other things as well. There's a thing called allostatic load on racial and ethnic minorities. What does that mean? Well, it's dealing with everyday interactions where overt and less obvious racism occur and must be managed by the minority individuals, leads to chronic stress that has physiological, that is, medical effects on the person. The economic burden on these communities due to the way the systems are structured has led to a wealth gap that is equivalent to a permanent recession for these populations. And finally, there is a meta-analysis that indicates that race is the main factor in housing disparities. So in summary, the presentation presented a lot of research conducted over several decades, some of it older and much of it newer, to make an empirical and statistical case for the fact that systems themselves operate in such a way as to disadvantage racial and ethnic minorities in this country. You could think of redlining in real estate, for example. So in a way, this is very much like the whole idea of statistical process control and trying to improve processes. It's a famous quote by Edwards Deming that experience teaches us nothing. That's experience is sort of emotional. You have to have data and statistics and you have to look at it. And that's what this whole REI Institute is doing in presenting this training. So what's the conclusion, the takeaway? You can't change something unless you can see it. The evidence presented in this 3-hour training session was to make the participants see it. And this is a challenge facing everybody that wants to address this issue. Only when systemic racism is seen and therefore acknowledged can steps be taken to correct the various systems. That sort of goes back to the expectation of being willing to be uncomfortable. People could say, well, I'm not racist, I don't do these things and so on, but we're not necessarily talking about that. We're talking about larger systems here. Obviously, this is not an easy dialogue, and I think people during this thing were a little uncomfortable with it, but that was one of the expectations. So at the end of it, my takeaway and what I want to present to the committee is I tried to relate this whole training episode to the role of this committee. We are, as I said at the beginning, supposed to be equity champions working to achieve the equity goals of One Fairfax and the county strategic plan. And we've discussed a lot of the issues that relate to the bigger systems, specifically, for example, how housing and wealth inequities have influenced transportation planning that results in many residents being underserved in terms of accessible and affordable public transportation, or even something as simple as we would think a walking or biking path to get them to work or activity center. And there might be other issues we can identify in the months ahead as we work through the active Fairfax transportation plan. So that goes back to what we just spent time talking about with the excellent presentation we just saw on the status. And I think that's our challenge. I think what Ken was saying, in essence, what my understanding of what he was saying was that this plan, as it's working at this point, is very well done, but it's sort of a managerial plan. It sort of looks like plans we're all familiar with. I think Ken was trying to describe a transformational vision, a transformational plan. And to do that, you have to have a big vision, and then you can work on the managerial parts of it down below. So I think, and we talked about some of the goals and so forth were maybe broad, and I think they have to be maybe at this point, but I think we need to get down to some nitty gritty here and think about it in terms of systems. What systems are at work here in terms of what we're trying to achieve with the Active Fairfax plan? So I'll leave it at that. I highly recommend the training if you get a chance to do it. It's well worth it, I think, and it may trigger some similar thoughts and challenges to you if you do take it. Any questions?
So I don't have any questions, but I just want to thank you so much for attending. I think one of the reasons why I joined this committee was for these very actual reasons, and it has been a nice confluence of being able to work on the Active Fairfax plan while representing Mason District and thinking about this. I know I go after it sometimes, but to me, the systemic racism that plays out everywhere, and we just have to be thoughtful about what we're trying to do and be aware of it and not feel defensive about it, but just feel, as the slide said, be proactive with how we address it. And Bob, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sure that's what everyone else would be saying, and we all tend to agree. Thank you, Bob, for going to be uncomfortable for all of us. These are uncomfortable issues, and to bring it up and to talk about it, and of course, this next step that you're talking about, Bob, is how do we actually inspire the staff and the Active Fairfax plan and certainly One Fairfax and all that. How do we inspire them to actually move the needle? I think the most depressing thing for me is I believe they've probably done some decent statistics and all that stuff. It was surprising what you said. And the most frustrating thing for me is that this is after I don't know how many years of our trying to approach this systemically. So what it tells me is what we've been doing so far has not been working. And we're just going to have to redouble our efforts, but we're going to have to do something different, I think is my takeaway from all that. So that's the real challenge there. Any other comments on this issue that we want?
I just want to also second, thanks, Bob, for attending that training. I, having worked in public education, I having grown up in a house that was actively engaged in these sorts of social issues, if you will. From an early age, I always appreciate hearing from people in terms of, what they're thinking and how they can play a role as an ally and supporter. So just wanted to second and say thanks for that. And thanks for that information from that as well. What I think also is a very pressing thing is that we got to remember that, like, outside of those sorts of presentations where people are giving a lot of new information, there is still those opportunities that we have, especially as this board, to welcome and facilitate different voices being involved in these sorts of things. And that kind of goes back to how I think the Active Fairfax planning and, analysis of data and, having as many stakeholders in this conversation as possible, it shows up in that. So actively engaging with all members of the community is the most equitable way to go about it. And that's the only way to address these issues of not only systemic racism, but overall societal ills.
Thanks, Tammy. Appreciate that. Okay, anybody else? Hesitant to move on to issues at 3 minutes to 9, but let's see.
Hey, Ken, if I could just jump in.
Go ahead.
Not a couple issues necessarily, but just some future presentation plans or potential presentation plans. I think Nicole mentioned earlier, and maybe I'm just saying not to steal her thunder, but our plan next next month's meeting is to give a presentation on the safety plan, the systematic safety plan. And then also we've heard from representatives of the Capital Trails Coalition and the Fairfax Trails and Streams Group, who would be interested in presenting at a future meeting. We're thinking that maybe July might make the most sense, given how we think just time needs in the June meeting for the safety plan will shake out. But if those things sound interesting to you, we'd be happy to facilitate getting their attendance and presentation in the future.
Both are a good idea. Yes, I saw both requests. So both are fit very well within our charter. So I think that would be okay. I think let's I'll execute unless anybody has any strong objections. The chairman's prerogative. We'll do that. We'll go for the safety plan in June, and we'll do the trails folks in July. Does anybody have any other burning issues that they want to be sure gets addressed tonight, or that we want to schedule for future meetings?
I just wanted to mention that the Park Authority is celebrating National Trails Day, which is June 5th, with a project unveiling, I believe, over in Mr. Cosgrove's area. The Smokewood Park Bridge that we've recently completed is going to be the project that we are celebrating for National Trails Day. And then also, I just wanted to mention that I'm trying to get back to my goal of meeting with the district members of the TSB before the pandemic hit when I first started at the Park Authority. So using Mr. Albright's invitation to go see Mason, I'm meeting with Jim Klein on hopefully Friday, if I can recover from the vaccine shot quickly. And then if anyone else wants to invite me out or schedule a visit with me to talk about park stuff or trail connections in parks or in your district, let me know. I'm happy to come out and meet with you guys. So give me an invite if you desperately want to meet with me.
And Beth, it was great, everybody. Beth will take you out to lunch afterwards. So have a great time. Always be sure to call her up.
Ken, I'll jump in and just say the meeting in June is on the 9th, so we need inputs for any other agenda items by the 26th of May to me, and then I'll get them on to David.
Roger that. Hopefully everybody takes note of that. Anybody else? Well, you can probably hear my clock chiming in the background, which tells us what time it is. So you know what's in order.
Move to adjourn.
And there we are. So at the strike of 9, we can say we've adjourned. I will see everybody next month.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.